Jesus Freak here. Oh no! Jesus Freak's holding up the Sega pad! Okay, I'll explain what this is that I'm cutting together. Because it's hard for someone with only two hands. I don't have anywhere I can set my phone when I'm shooting at my 40-year-old CRT. So when you're looking at actual footage from one of my old computers, you get shaky cam. So here's what I did. I've been talking about this a little bit already. With the help of someone on Discord, it was honestly more him than me. But we got the... I'm not going to say we got the MSX version of Lode Runner up on the Nabu, because it's not exactly the MSX version. What we got up on there was the MSX version with mostly the Apple levels. The Lode Runner is an Apple II game. And that's where I first played it, was on an Apple IIc back around 1985 or so. Now, as with other stuff I've worked on with the Nabu's hardware is basically the same as the MSX, and I use that to my advantage. The MSX version of Lode Runner, now as we understand, this was done by Compile. I'm not entirely sure. There's signs that it might have been done by ASCII, or partially by one and partially by the other. Compile does seem to take credit for it. So, I'm inclined to think it was them. Compile and Broderbund did have a connection around that time. They used to be called Programmers 3, and under that name, Broderbund released their game AE on the Apple II and the Atari 400 in the US. Well, they went and released Broderbund's Lode Runner on the MSX in Japan. Now, the reason I kind of had to mishmash these together the MSX version only has 76 levels. The original version had 150. Now, the reason there were only 76 levels is because of how games loaded on the MSX. It's stored on a cartridge, there's no banking hardware, so they're limited to 32K. There's not enough room for the whole game. In fact, the Nabu version of the game, before we crunched it, is 50K. If we hadn't crunched it, there'd be no way to load it. We used a Japanese executable packer. This executable packer, if you've heard of PK Lite, which Microsoft used, LZEXE, which id Software used, UPX, which is used by a lot of free projects. It's the same idea, only instead of being for DOS or for some modern operating system, it's for CP/M. And basically, Nabu uses CP/M under the hood. So that's what we did. We used a program called Popcom. And because of the way the game was coded, it crunched down to about half the size. So when we're sending the game over the wire from the virtual modem, which in my case is the laptop that's underneath this phone right now, to the system, only about 25K of data goes over the wire. Now, once I've talked about this, I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to show about 4 levels worth of gameplay. The first level is being played on this machine, on this actual Nabu, which you've seen me use before. The rest is just recorded in emulation on my other computer. Now, this program is designed, it can use the keyboard, arrow keys and ZX, or it can use a joystick or some other controller. And what we did is this. If somehow you happen to have the official controller, which you probably don't, or if somehow you got an Atari CX40, or one of the knockoffs, or one of the modern ones that they sell for the flashbacks, or you get a Commodore joystick, still lying around from the 80s, it'll work just fine with that. There's only one button, so if you press left or right, it'll remember that, and when you press fire, it'll dig in the direction you were last facing. That works well enough. That's what the Commodore did. But if you have one of these, now I can't tell the difference right away, but once you press button 2, it'll remember that. From that point forward, it'll change the behavior to be more in line with what you'd expect from this. If you press 1, it'll dig to the left, and if you press 2, it'll dig to the right. I'll be back in a few minutes with a conclusion. There we go. This plays more or less like the original Apple II version. Now, I'm not particularly good at this game. That's why this is the only footage I got. I would have liked to do a more complete playthrough. I don't really have the capability of that right now. For those of you who want to try this, I'm going to leave a link in the description. The .nabu file works with some of the virtual modems. The .com file is another way to load it. There's a .200, which is a raw disk image, which works in some older versions of MAME. I won't tell you to use the -X switch in Marduk to run the .com file directly, but you can do that. Alright. Also, it's possible to get caught in such a way that you can't get out of a place and you can't dig yourself out of a place, and you can't get caught by the robots either. In that case, what you do is you hit escape and then press A for abort. This will kill you. You go back to the beginning of the level. A feature similar to this exists in most versions of the game. This comes right out of the MSX version. It's pretty much unchanged. Anyway, I'll leave a link in the description. Jesus, freak out.